Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Middle-earth Play-by-Mail fan channel. Today I'm wanting to do a strategic deep dive into all of the rules regarding taxation. It's often said there are only two things in life which are guaranteed, death and taxes, and in Middle-earth, well, not even death's guaranteed. I mean, elves can live forever, and Nazgul are undead, so the only thing you're really guaranteed in life is taxation. It goes without saying that gold is essential to your nation for it to continue functioning, and the more gold you have, the more powerful you can be, particularly in terms of the armies you can sustain in the field and various other things that you can do. In terms of getting gold, there are several routes for doing that. Obviously, you can sell products that your nation has to the market. The downside with this is that there's a limit on how much you can sell per turn. Normally it's only about 20,000 gold pieces worth. There's also the changing market prices mean that you could think you're sitting on a really valuable stock of lots of steel or bronze, and the market price could crash and it's not worth as much as you need it to be. You can also get money through mining, which means putting camps in mountains or maybe in rough hills hexes, but again this isn't entirely predictable and those camps can easily get burnt down, and there are only so many places and they're geographically in fixed areas that you have to go for them. So this is also less reliable. It's also affected by changes in the weather when the climate changes due to season changes. Another route for getting gold is through theft, sending mid-level agents out to your opponent's towns and cities and stealing gold. And while that's fun, you probably hit a point when you'll rather have agents who are competent to go off and do other things like sabotage or assassinations. You can receive gold through donations from fellow teammates, but that relies on them having the gold to give you anyway. So the most reliable way to get a good solid baseload to your economy is by having a good income from taxation. Now, taxation in some ways is very simple. It gives you a fixed amount each turn according to your tax base multiplied by your tax rate. Your tax base is easy to work out. It's 2,500 gold per level of population centre above a camp. So a village has 2,500 tax base, a town is 5,000, major town 7,500, and a city is 10,000 tax base. You multiply that by the tax rate for your nation, a percentage from 0 to 100, and that tells you how much gold you get across all your population centres of size village and above. Now, obviously, the bigger your tax base is, the more money you will get. So to increase your tax base, how do you do that? Well, the best way to do it is to go and conquer someone else's larger population centres. That, however, is easier said than done, because they're probably going to protect them and they will have armies that are going to want to do the same to you. So it's not always as easy to just go out and take something from your enemy and then you're bigger. So the other way of doing it is to improve your existing population centres with emissaries, decent level emissaries, going out, finding reasonable loyalty villages, towns, major towns, cities, and improving them using the Influence Other command. Obviously, there is a cost to this. It costs 4,000 gold to improve a village, 6,000 for a town, 8,000 to up to a major town, and to move a major town from a city will cost 10,000 gold. That cost only goes through if the order is successful. So if you try and they fail, the money isn't spent. So you can do some sums to work out how quickly you get your money back from the increased tax base. Obviously, if you're increasing something small, it's a lower cost, and so you'll get your money back quicker. So at a 40% tax rate, increasing something to a village will give you an extra 1,000 gold per turn, which means in 4 turns it pays for itself. At 60% tax rate, you're getting an extra 1,500 per turn. So over 3 turns, it pays for itself. So, you know, if you've got 4,000 spare in a turn, you spend that increasing a camp to a village, you're at 60% tax rate, then suddenly instead of getting a spare 4,000 per turn, you get a spare 5,500 a turn. And with the increasing amount you get, well, provided you don't have other issues to deal with, like invading free people armies wanting to burn you to the ground, you can then reinvest that and you have a virtuous circle, steadily expanding more gold, leading you to be able to invest in getting bigger population centres, which in turn generate more gold. However, when you go to the very top level from a major town, that again only increases the tax base by 2,500, but it costs you 10,000 gold to do it. So at a tax rate of 40%, it'll take 10 turns to pay back that money of that 10,000 gold. At 60% tax rate, it'll take 7 turns to cover the amount that you've sunk into it. So it's always more cost efficient to invest in the smaller population centres. You get more bang for your buck there. One thing to notice as well, that while increasing the size of a population centre increases the tax base, it also does slightly decrease the amount of goods that are produced at that population centre. So that is a bit of a trade-off. So if you've got somewhere that's producing really good quantities of a strategically important good, if you suddenly go and improve that from a camp to a village to a town and so forth, you will have much less of that strategic good either to use for the strategic purposes, making armour, war machines, whatever it may be, or just for selling on the market. So there is a downside to just forever increasing the size of your population centres. So that's increasing tax base. Then the other side of how much tax you get is the tax rate itself. Without having to build any more towns or cities, you can just get more money by telling your people they have to cough up more money in tax. The downside of this is that it actually costs loyalty in those population centres. If loyalty falls below 15, they may start to degrade, which means they will drop a level if they fail a particular test. So, suddenly you've got a town, you find it's a village, next turn it's a camp. A camp can completely disappear if the loyalty isn't there. The people just pack up and go home. The other problem with having a low loyalty is that it makes it harder to increase the population centre in size. I will do a video about population centres and economic development, so looking at that in a bit more detail. And also, the lower your loyalty is, the lower the defence of that population centre is. So if you're wanting a population centre to be tough and to be able to cope against enemies trying to influence it away with the 525 influence other order, or by just sending in an army to capture or destroy it, then the higher the loyalty, the better. Now, with the order 300 change tax rate, there will be a corresponding change in the loyalty across all of your cities of approximately half the amount that you've changed it by. So if you put your tax rate up by 20%, you will expect to lose on average around 10 loyalty points on each and every population centre. Obviously, this is something that will have a big significance if you are changing your tax rate after you've had some low mid-level emissaries go out and plant a few camps. Camps are planted with half the loyalty of the emissary skill of the emissary who's going out. So if you've got a rank 40 emissary, he goes out there, he plants a camp for you, it's going to be at 20 loyalty. Your boss then says, I know what, I'm going to increase the tax rate from 40 up to 60, and suddenly your rank 20 loyalty camp is a 10 loyalty camp, and there's a good chance it will just degrade and vanish. So I strongly recommend getting your tax rate up as early as you can before you even get out there and start placing camps. I have even seen some people, if they've got some if their starting population centres are reasonably high loyalty, and maybe if they've got their vulnerable ones have got fortifications on them, fortifications give protection against low loyalty places degrading. I have seen people say, right, well, I'm going to stick my tax rate from 40% up way up to 79%. And everything drops by 20 points of loyalty. All their starting camps are really unhappy. But then they go and they plant a few camps at, say, loyalty around about 20, and they drop the tax rate from 79 down to 60. And suddenly everyone says, hooray, the beneficent leader is giving us our money back by lowering tax to a mere 60%. And loyalty across the nation will suddenly bump up by about 10 points. So all these camps that you've planted at about rank 20 suddenly go up to rank 30. So that is one trick to bear in mind, but it's a bit high cost and you don't want to leave that tax rate above 60 for too long. The reason being is that there are tax bands which every turn, depending on where your tax is, the loyalty of all your population centres will be affected to a small degree by the level of taxation you have. If your taxation is in a middle band of between 40 and 60 points, 60%, the rate of decay and the rate of gain roughly cancel each other out. So over time, all the loyalties will stay the same. You might occasionally gain a point or lose a point, but it pretty much evens out. At below 40, you will actually gain a few loyalty points on every pop centre every turn. And above 60, you will lose a few every turn. Once you go above 79, once you're at 80 or above, you will actually lose a little bit more every turn, and that will quite quickly really start to erode the loyalty of your population centres. So keep tax high for long enough, it will all go down. So the pushing the tax rate up really high and then dropping it to cheer everyone up is something which should only be done over a very short period of time, 3 or 4 turns, because otherwise you will have burnt off all the benefits you are likely to get just through extended turns, turn by turn, of eroding the loyalty. Changing your tax rate is done in 2 ways. One is with an order at your capital, order 300, change tax rate. This is a command order, and it requires, well, you can get away with it just about with a commander in the rank 30s. However, they're likely to either fail or only put your tax rate up by a certain amount. Usually a good place to put your tax rate up is 60%, because that's where you get the maximum tax return without the continuous turn-by-turn decrease in loyalty. So 60% is a good place to aim for if you can get it there very early in the game. But to move it all those 20 points in one go, you normally need a commander whose skill is at least 40 and probably 50. Above 50, it should happen quite automatically. Sometimes you don't have that commander on turn 0, or you don't have that commander in place to issue it the order in turn 1, or your commanders are probably quite busy doing other things like recruiting and naming new characters. So it's very challenging sometimes to fit in that early tax increase right at the start. However, there is a second way to increase your tax rate without even having a commander to issue a change tax rate order, and it requires you to be very good with your calculations, and it's deliberately making sure that you don't have enough money to cover your costs partway through the turn, so that your tax rate has to be put up automatically to cover your costs. This happens in the late 300s in the turn order. Okay, so you change tax rate at 300, and if you haven't got enough money to cover all of your costs after you've bought and sold goods from orders 310 through to 325, at that point the calculations are done, and if you don't have enough money in your treasury, if your amount held is negative, because after you've sold goods, you will then have to pay for your costs, so population centre costs, army costs, and character costs will then, at that point in the turn, before you get into the bulk of other command orders, those costs are figured in at that point. So if you don't have enough money to cover all of those costs, the tax rate is moved up automatically. It is possible, if you're very clever, to work out how much you could buy in around 310, 315 with the purchase or bid from Caravans orders, to make sure that you don't have enough money left. And once your costs are taken off, to make it so that your tax rate is automatically put to 60% to cover your shortfall. I mean, it does require a bit of calculations, but it's not hard if you can do a bit of basic maths. And that is one way to kind of cheat your tax rate up without having to rely on having a commander in place who's competent enough to do it. Just to note, if your tax rate is forced up automatically, I have heard, and I haven't looked at the numbers to confirm it, but just to put it in there, that the drop in loyalty across your population centres will be proportionally larger than if it was done through a planned 300 change tax rate order. So I can't confirm that. It is something I've heard and just something to be aware of. But if you're doing it in turn one, just by buying out as much as you can of one good and deliberately selling your economy short, then it kind of doesn't matter because your starting population centres should have pretty good loyalty. The other thing to note doing this tactic is it does mean you will end up with no money in your nation's bank, in reserves, by the late 300s. So any orders coming after that, particularly name characters, they won't happen because you won't have the money for it. But for a one-off turn, it can be done. Last thing just to say as well is that the place where tax comes in the turn order and where the money is generated, as I said, it's in the sort of the 370s if you look at the turns going through. It's basically after all the miscellaneous command orders of transferring goods and transferring armour between armies. But before you get into the orders of 400 and onwards. So if your tax rate isn't enough to cover all of your costs, it will get bumped up. And if your tax rate goes over 100% in order to meet your costs, you go bankrupt. Your nation dies. Perhaps death and taxes do go hand in hand. So just to beware, if you have an ally who you think, blimey, they're a bit low on cash, we need to send them money. Do some calculations to see if they sell everything they can sell, will they have enough money so that they can keep their tax rate to 100% or less? Because if it goes over 100%, no matter what they do with selling goods and well, basically selling goods is the main thing they can do, then that nation is going to die next turn. There's no two ways about it. Because if you send them gold is sent through 948 transfer caravans order. That will reach them after that nation has gone. I have rather incompetently before seen a nation in trouble, sent them gold. They next turn have gone bankrupt, and then my gold turns up. So all I've done is given them free gold. I've depleted my own cash reserves, and I'm sending money to a bankrupt nation. So always plan a turn or two ahead with your finances and make sure that you send gold or send goods for your cash-strapped allies to sell early in the turn before they get to the late 300s and all the tax changes go through. So that, I hope, has covered lots of different angles all about taxation. It's an important part of the economics of the game. It's the most reliable form of gold production that you can have. And understanding how you can keep your tax base high and increase your tax base, how you can set your tax rate to just the right level. Oh, I should have said, in my opinion, 40% is probably the worst and least imaginative tax rate in the game. That's where you start. If you find yourself stuck there and you can't increase your tax rate because it would burn off some of your camps by destroying loyalty, just drop it by 1 point. And dropping taxes requires a very low level commander, and then you'll be at tax rate 39%, and at least that 1% of tax income you've lost will be negligible, but you will gain loyalty every turn. Should have mentioned that earlier before winding up. But yeah, that's everything I feel I want to say about taxes. I hope you found this interesting. Do have a look at some of the other videos we've got on the channel. We're going to keep more things coming out over the next few weeks and months, just as I think of things and find them interesting. At the moment, I'm trying kind of working through the orders that crop up. So I'll probably need to do something about some of the earlier orders, like changing of allegiance, and something about challenges. But we'll just see what happens. I wanted to do this one all about taxation because it's really interesting, and I always feel that economics undergirds and supports all the other interesting fun things that happen in the game. So it's good to get your economic understanding right first.